Welcome to the first edition of the Guest Podcast here at the UBC Neuroscience Association. I have the pleasure of being here with Dr. Cristina Schaurich, who is a PhD student here at the Brain Behavior Lab and Hive Lab at the University of British Columbia. She is a pediatric neurosurgeon who is now pursuing research looking at brain morphometry, skull development, and brain development itself now. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Nice to meet you, and I'm pleased to be here as well and to talk a little bit about my life as a researcher.
Awesome. So speaking of that, you weren't always a researcher. You went into clinical medicine earlier. Could you talk about sort of the career trajectory? Because even I'm not that familiar with it, even though we've worked together in the past.
Yeah. So I am originally from Brazil. So I did my undergrad in medicine in Brazil, and then I went to residency, straight to residency. During my undergrad, actually, I was involved in like a couple of research in surgery, specifically not too much to neuroscience in the very beginning. And then during my residency, I went more for this oncology, neuro-oncology side for research, where I published this paper about thalamic tumors, and now I'm actually writing a book chapter about it. And then when I finished my residency in Brazil, actually 1 year before, I went to an international congress, Paediatric Neurosurgery Congress. By the end of my residency, I was already interested in the pediatric field. And so I did this research on thalamic tumors, and then I presented in this congress, in this conference. And then was when everything started with UBC. Because people there from UBC were like watching the talk, and then they were interested in joining and collaborating with the research.
Right.
And that was back to 2014.
Okay.
14, yeah. And then I came here for the first time 2015 as a med student. No, just a minute. You have to cut this.
That's all good.
Think about it.
Yeah.
First time I came to UBC was during my med school. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
We're learning about the timeline, yeah.
Sorry, I went here actually for neurosurgery observership at that time. Because I was interested in residency. I will come back a little bit in my story. And then I came here as med students, fourth year med student.
Right.
And then I went with the neurosurgery service at VGH and here at UBC with Dr. Krebs. That was when I met Dr. Claudia Krebs in the neuroanatomy lab. So this was 2005. Oh my God, almost 20 years ago. And and then I fell in love with UBC.
Right on.
That time.
As we all do.
And then I come back to the residency time. So UBC was always in the back of my mind, like, I want to go there, there's something there. And then came this conference during residency. This was in 2014. And then I came here as a researcher for the first time in 2016.
Gotcha.
At Children's Hospital then.
I see.
BC Children's.
And that was as a master's student?
No, just as I was a neurosurgery resident in Brazil. So I came here only for data collection.
I see.
So I came here to look at the thalamic tumors from Children's Hospital.
I see.
And I went also to Toronto, to the Kids Hospital.
Right on.
So we did this collaboration in 2016. And then I received the invitation from Dr. Steinbach at Children's Hospital at the time. He was the head of the department for a master here on the tumors, right? On this project.
Specifically thalamic pediatric tumors.
Yes, but, things change.
Yeah.
And I came here as a master's student, but then I came with another proposal because the thalamic tumors are already published. So I came here and they say, okay, you know what? I think I'm interested in studying how the skull develops, right? Because we mainly in pediatric neurosurgery we operate on craniosynostosis, right? In terms of like craniofacial surgery, it's very common, right? In pediatric surgery when the skull bone sutures close earlier, right, than expected, so the brain cannot expand, right? So we open that sutures, right? And this must be done like in the first 4 months of life, usually. So what happened is that I was interested in knowing what is the timing for that 3D directionality of the skull development, right? And then they say, okay, let's look at this. And then we started to do the work. And so I spent here from 2018 until 2022 for my master. So COVID hit, right? And everything. And then at the same time, I was doing my fellowship here, my clinical fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery, all the same time. So master's, fellowship, clinical fellowship. And so then this was my master thesis with Children's Hospital, right? And Dr. Krebs, at the same time, was my co-supervisor, where she was helping us to build the 3D models. Right, this skull 3D model.
Just to clarify, at this point, you've moved to UBC to do research on, you moved originally for thalamic tumors, and then you got into skull development because of its clinical applications. And then while doing a fellowship, you also picked up a master's project with Dr. Krebs?
Yeah, so my master project was with Dr. Steinbach as a supervisor, but Dr. Krebs came in as the committee member, right? As a co-supervisor. For building the 3D models because the Hive is, like it's a lab that we build visualization tools or visualization materials, right? Of mainly anatomical specimens or for medical purposes, and anatomical purposes. So so she came in with this, contribution from the Hive. So then I started to work with Dr. Krebs again.
Right on.
On the skulls 3D models.
Gotcha. And let's talk about that research, because you recently just had that published in a pretty prestigious journal. Tell me about that process. Like, what was it like doing that research on those pediatric skulls, and then how did that culminate in what you're doing now?
Yeah. So we started to look at how the bones, like the different bones of the skull grow, and the timing of this grow. And we ended up finding a non-linear growth pattern that is well described in the literature already, right? Like everyone knows that the brain grows from posterior to anterior, sensory to motor, right? But we could demonstrate that in a 3D view by showing that the fontanelles and the suture close from posterior to anterior, driven by the occipital bone growth during the first 8 months of life. And then after that period, the frontal bone, started to develop faster, and then start to drive the anterior fontanelle closure up to 2 years old.
So around 8 months, it flips from being posterior to anterior to anterior to
posterior. Exactly. So we could demonstrate that, and we recently, last week, we published it on Scientific Report.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's a hard work. It's worth it, right? So that was it. And so during my master, research is always like that, right? While you're working on one thing, something like just came up. So this can explain why, for example, children with microcephaly, meaning when the brain is smaller for multiple reasons, but usually because of developmental abnormalities, right, in the fetal stage of the development, the suture close earlier, right? And then we call microcephaly, right? So they have like small heads,
Yeah.
right? So if you think about it, I think so. That means that the brain development drives the bone growth, right?
Right.
Yes. So that brings us to my PhD project. So I wanted to look at the development of the posterior aspect of the brain, right? That is like, it's a quite of like understudied area, I would say. Mainly like for the, limitations in tools to read and to visualize this development in neonatal and babies' brains.
I see.
So that's the challenge, right? So what I wanted to see now is if we can explain that and visualize that in a 3D perspective, how the brain develops in the first 2 years of life, and correlate that with the bone growth, right? And we are be looking at specifically the visual spatial. This word for me is so difficult. Spatial. The visual spatial pathways formation, right? That we believe it's first, right, in the first 6 months of life, and then in the second part is the cerebellum and occipital lobe together, right? So that's our hypothesis, and now we are starting to analyze data.
Incredible. Yeah. That's great work. I want to go back to sort of how you found your way sort of into research and specifically neuroscience. Can we like go all the way back to undergrad where you said you had some surgical research experience and you were interested in going into medicine and then going into surgery? Could you talk about like what motivated you to do that? Like what did you find interesting about it?
To go to neurosurgery?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about anything else.
So it was just like the obvious choice for you? Like it was just the most interesting?
No, I remember actually when I decided, it was in my first year med school.
Yeah.
When I went to the anatomy lab. And then I had my first neuroanatomy, like hands-on neuroanatomy lab.
Right.
And my teacher was a neurosurgeon. And I was like just amazed, by the brain, by his acknowledgement. You know what I mean? He was so wise. And I was like, I want to know everything about the brain. That was like for me, for something that is. So from that day onwards, I think for the first 6 months, I started to shadowing him. Right. And I was like, every time, I was like every time, like I was shadowing him all the time. I was like looking for him in the hospital and what he's doing. I was, I think I was a pain in that. Sorry. And then, so for me, it was a natural path. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So since the beginning of med school, I kind of focused to like neuroscience side, neurosurgical side.
Right.
I don't know if that I would recommend that, right? Because I think I might have like left some things behind from the others, field. But for me, it worked well. So I went to neurosurgery from the very, so all my electives, I did in neurosurgery and everything. So during my vacation,
you had a plan and you just executed.
So I never thought about anything else,
Makes sense.
Yeah, so I fell in love with the brain in my first neuroanatomy lab for sure.
That's incredible. So how do you go from like working in clinical medicine and becoming a neurosurgeon? And that's a very long process, years of residency. And so you spend all this time as a neurosurgeon, and I'd love to talk about that. But then how do you find your way back to research and doing sort of non-clinical things now? Yeah.
So as I told you, I am from Brazil, right?
Right.
So then we decided to immigrate to Canada, right, as a family. Because at that time, in 2018, I already had a child, and Ariel was 2 years old. So then we went here for my fellowship, my master, and everything went well. But you know, we have our personal lives as well. So you're not only like professionals, right?
Yeah.
And then during my master, I also had another baby that it's Elena. She's 5 years old now. And also I unfortunately, I went to a divorce, right? And at that time, when I finished my fellowship, it was a hard time because I had to decide if I would go to the clinical field or just research and take care of my kids, right? Because you know, like a neurosurgeon's life, it's very busy. I love neurosurgery, but it's busy. Right. So I would not like see my kids, you know, and I was okay with that at that time. But again, like personal life came, I had my divorce, so I had this decision to make. And I went for family side.
Gotcha.
Right? And for me, so going to the academic aspect, the research aspect, it was easier to you know, to
it offered a better work-life balance for you.
Exactly. It's more flexible, right? It's busy as well, but it's another kind of busy, right? Because I can do my own schedule, right? I have my flexibility.
Gotcha.
On the other hand, hospital life, you don't have any controls, right? You are there for your patients, and that's it, right?
Right on. Tell me about that, because there's very few people who are in your position who already have an MD, already have a really good career in clinical medicine, and then decide to pursue a PhD. What exactly is the purpose of getting a PhD? Like, are you pushing the frontiers of science? Do you think your learning is just accelerating? I've heard mixed reviews about it from a lot of people, and I'm sure people who are in neuroscience at undergrad right now are thinking maybe a PhD is an option for them. How do you sort of weigh the pros and cons of that?
Yeah. So for me, again, I think it's a natural path that came to me once I decided to go to the academic side of things. But I think both. I always think about like to add to, you know, I like the words that you just said, like pushing the science frontiers. So I think about that, right? What people are not doing, right? So I think someone has to do it. That's one thing, right? So when you realize that, oh, I can do this, I have the support I need, and I had the idea, why not, right? So go for it. This is one. Second thing I think that the PhD brings to me is a lot of learning. I learn a lot, as well, right? I learn specific things about one subject that it's of interest for me, right? And for the humanity.
Right.
That's the big deal, I think, right? That you will make difference in the world, you know what I mean? This will be important to, you know, our little ones, you know, like to provide better care for them. So I think the serving part of everything that you do, it's important, right? So I'm an MD, as you said. So for me, my inner self is always like, okay, what can I do to help?
Right.
To help you, to help everyone. So in doing my PhD, like during my first year, I'm in the second year now, I realized that we can do a lot if you have the support that you need, right? And I really believe that my project will add something important to humanity, right? And help children, right? To, you know, develop MDs to take care of them. So it's a big deal. It's bigger than my own and personal life.
Right.
That's what I'm. But for me specifically, so if I go to my professional development, so I will look at my belly button a little bit. I think would be helpful to, for example, get a professor position in the future. You know, so these kind of things you need to think about it, right? Yeah. So what I want for me, like in 10 years, right? Okay, I want to teach here at UBC or whatever, right? So what do I need for that, right? I need a PhD. So that's what is another thing, right? You must have a PhD to teach. No, that's not the thing that no, I'm not telling you that, right? But
a majority of professors do have PhDs.
Exactly. So if you want to be competitive, you have to get a PhD.
Right.
This is not my main reason, but it's something that adds to the decision to get one. You know what I mean? So I think everything's the planning, you know, that's from, I think from, I don't know, maybe at some age or some, like, you know, a point of your life that you start to be worried about your future, but the future of your family as well, right?
Yeah.
And for me now, the PhD is kind of a bridge, I would say, to where I want to be in 10 years.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
So would you say like the sort of meaning and purpose you get out of your PhD is sort of the most rewarding part of being a grad student? Like the purpose of just being able to add to clinical medicine, you can notice these gaps because you worked in clinical medicine and now you're trying to fulfill them with your research.
Exactly. You got it. Exactly, because when I was doing my OR times, like operating on children, a lot of things like I could notice, right? For example, where could I study like children's neuroanatomy, right? I was like, oh my gosh, how can I study this? Right? There is no like a place that you can go there and see how you have for adults, for example, right?
Yeah.
Right away, you go like in any library, you have like this. So how can and if you think about it, children, they have different kinds of anatomy from like a newborn at 8 years old. They are completely different heads.
Yeah.
Completely different bones. Completely, even like the consistency of the brain is different.
Right.
Everything is different.
Yeah. Myelination patterns, bone growth, all that.
Everything, right? So how come no one else yet like thought about it, like, okay, I need to put this all together? We have lots of atlases, MRI atlases, 4D, 3D atlases for children. I'm not saying that we don't. We have it, okay? But we didn't put all the things together in one tool or one place for people to go and study to, you know, provide a better care for children. So my residents, my fellows or whatever, they can go to the OR knowing the anatomy that they will see there according to the children's ages. You know? So that's our other aim, right, for this PhD, is to build this tool, right? So this is when the hive comes, right? So the hives will come for this project to build this 4D atlas, right? So why do you call 4D atlas? Because the fourth dimension will be time, right? So we're gonna see the development
longitudinally over from like neonates to infants to children and young adults.
Yeah,
it's incredible. So you noticed like that you didn't have a resource to study pediatric neuroanatomy when you were a clinician or you worked as a clinician, and so now you want to create that resource so that future clinicians can then use it to provide better care for their patients.
Yeah, and not only clinicians. This is one, yes, but the other purpose for this atlas is to try. It's an attempt to add pediatric neuroanatomy to academic curriculum, right?
Right. Is that something that's absent right now?
We don't have it, right?
Wow.
So we don't have it, not even in the grad level.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to ask a little bit about your clinical career and like your time as a neurosurgeon and a pediatric neurosurgeon in particular. Are there like moments or specific days or surgeries that stand out to you or patients that I'd love to hear like a cool story about, you know, something that had an impact on you?
Oh, multiples.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because pediatric neurosurgery for me was something very, how do I say that? I was not expecting to go to pediatric because I was always like super like as a resident, I was very like strong. I was always like to the trauma side of things, right? I enjoy like trauma
The
surgery.
adrenaline of it.
Yeah, exactly. But then I went to the pediatric rotation, and I fell in love with pediatrics because I felt like that patient, that child, they really need us, right? They are not doing like things to be sick. They are just okay. Let me explain a little bit. For adults, for example, my feeling was like the adults do things, and we have to deal with their consequences. The children, they are just like angels, right? They are just like,
it's a blank slate.
Yeah, so they are sick. Something happens. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what I jumped into pediatrics, and I was like, okay, I think I can do that. And they are so delicate. Again, each patient is a different patient according to the age. And then and when I had my first child, I started to feel like, okay, every patient is like my child. You know, it's interesting. So I was always like totally involved with each case, emotionally as well, right? So this thing that everyone says, neurosurgeons, they are cold, they are not, okay? Right. Emotionally as well. And I learned a lot with them, right? But I think some cases and some families, right? Because when you talk about pediatric, you're not talking about the patient itself, it's the family, right? It's all involved. I think, of course, there are like some stories that stand out, and we never forget, and especially the ones that are complicated cases, right? That they stay with us like for years sometimes, right? So I remember this case that we had this 13 years old, that he had a tumor, a very bad tumor, and we had to operate on him, I think, 5 or 6 times. Wow. In a year. Wow. And he was like on a bed for a year. Can you imagine that? And I got a little bit emotional. So I remember when the first time that he stood and walked. Wow. Right? So for us, for me, that was like, oh my God. You know, it's like all the work that, like, you know, it's very like the hard work, right? Yeah. So it's worth it, right? And he was smiling, and he was well, you know, after all that, you know, that year full of surgeries and infection and antibiotics, and you know what I mean. And yeah, so it's so rewarding to see the, you know, they recovering, and that you did like something that really, you know, added to their lives and to the family's lives. And I learned so much about that, you know, the Christmas elf in the shelf, yes, family. So I think that's why I don't forget them. Yeah. They taught me all the things about the elf in the shelf, and I started to do it in my place, right? Because of them.
That's beautiful. I can only imagine how gratifying it must have been to a whole year of like multiple surgeries and complex case management leading up to this one moment where, you know, you had someone actually get out of bed and be able to stand up.
And it's so small, like small things that for us is like normal in our daily life. Right. But for those children, it's such like a important moment. And so standing is something very, you know, difficult if you think about neurophysiology and neuroanatomy and everything, right?
Everything from, you know, your basal ganglia to your cerebellum as well.
Exactly, but we don't think about this because we are doing this like naturally.
Super unconscious.
Yeah. So but for sure there are some special people that, you know, pass.
Yeah, that's incredible. And now that you're doing more research, what do you find is like are there challenges that you really enjoy solving with research, or what have been sort of the key moments along your master's and now your PhD?
Yeah, I think there are challenges, of course. I think the main challenge for me in the very beginning was the communication. As you know, English is not my first language, right? And this is very important to mention here because it's hard for us to come here as an immigrant and, for example, write down a thesis in a language that is not yours, right? And publish in a high impact journal. So that was like a very hard learning process for me, you know. But again, it worked because I think, well, we published in Nature, so. But this for me was very challenging to get to the level, like the writing level that they expect us to have, to get to reach, right? That is one. I think for me the language was a very, very important challenge. The other thing I think about research itself is to keep updated.
Right.
Okay.
Just an ocean of stuff being published every single day.
So this is something very challenging, and I recently had to rewrite my proposal. Right. You know that.
Right. Yeah.
Because someone published something very similar to what I was thinking about. Right. Similar, not the same. But again, and then so things are happening too fast, and I think my impression is that it's faster and faster and faster. Right. So to keep it, updated is a challenge. But on the other hand, I think the communication. This is something that I learned, and I think it's very it's good to know that the communication between other among the scientific community, it works, right? So for example, if I want to know something about a specific paper, I just email the PI or the first author, and I can have a very good conversation, a meeting. So this is something that I was not aware of before my PhD. To be honest,
the collaborative aspect of science.
The collaborative, exactly. So this is so nice. For example, now I am collaborating with Harvard, with Ghent University, with other places in the world that they are also working with the same kind of thing. So you don't need to invent the wheel, right? So if you know someone else that can collaborate because they already went there. Yeah. So this collaboration, I think it's something that I learned during my PhD that is very interesting. But again, it's a lot of work, a lot of reading, right? And now with these AI tools, right? So it's so much easier now, right? Yeah. That it was 2 years ago, I would say, right? So the last 2 years was a boom of this generative AI,
exponential growth,
right? This stuff. And so it's something that I learned to use during research and also in teaching, right? Because I think for me the big thing is teaching as well. I love teaching. So for me it's something that we need to leverage, I think, all the things that we have available for us, research-wise, teaching-wise, but again, using it wisely, right? But this is a challenge this is something that it's a current thing, right? We are learning. Everyone here is learning how to deal with that right now.
Absolutely.
In the research field, right?
I think it's something that we're all grappling with as undergrads too. On that note, I'm wondering, to wrap it up here, what advice do you have to undergraduates who maybe want to pursue a career like yours, whether that's going into grad school and doing research that helps, push the frontiers of science, or they want to go into the clinical medicine side of things and actually practice it, or maybe even go into neurosurgery? What advice do you have for them?
That's so hard to give advice, but I think the main thing would be try to listen to your heart and do what you like to do. because things can get very hard if you go through one way that you don't like, that you are just doing for status or something like that. There are a lot of people doing this.
Yeah.
Right? Especially in medicine, right? So I think the most important thing for your career is to do what you like to do, what you want to learn about it, right? And go for that, right? You can do whatever you want, right? You can be a neurosurgeon, you can do neuroscience, you can do whatever you want, but just focus on that. And as I told you, like I want to be a professor here, right? What I have to do to go there? Of course, there are things that you have to do that you don't like much. That's fine, okay? Every life is like that, right? You learn with the difficulties as well, right?
Right.
But for life, that's my advice. Like, listen to your heart.
That's beautiful.
Go through, to the things that you love, and you're gonna be fine. Because the rest will be consequences of your hard work, right?
Yeah. On that note, I do have like a question I want to tag on here. It's something that I hear often about neurosurgery, that it is this path that has a lot of morbidity and mortality and death and sadness and neurological deficits, and that's what a lot of people cite as the reason why they don't want to go into it. Does that like hold true in clinical medicine? Is that something that is a big enough impact that it should push someone away from going into neurosurgery because they don't want to deal with all that like morbidity and mortality on a daily basis? And how much of that is there?
A lot. No, that's true. Yeah, sure. You deal with life and death like every day, right? But again, I think it depends on why you were there, right? For me, that was the reason, because I realized that I could help those people, right? So they were lucky that I was there. You know what I mean? That was my mindset, because it's very hard, to be there all the time. Neurosurgery is very heavy residency program. It's if not the heaviest, is one of the most difficult ones. So it's your life, right? You don't have time for anything else. So that's why I say, if you like it, if you feel like that's the thing that you came here to do it, just go for it, right? But yeah, it's sad, right? You're gonna see like a lot of people like pass, but this is life. People pass away. So, but if you can help, somewhat,
right?
I think that's why we're here, right? Like to help, to serve people. So. But of course, it's not for everyone, right? So you need to feel it. So that's why, if you think about it, my recommendation would be go for observership first, right? Do it your rotation, neurosurgery, or any, try to get a glance, a snapshot of what like a daily life would be. So I think that's why the elective are there, right? So you can you have a taste of but it's difficult. It's hard. I cannot lie to you and say, oh no, it's gonna be fine. No, it's hard. It's really hard. You sometimes you don't leave the hospital for a week, depending on right. But I think every like job has their dark sides as well. But I think you get used to it, right? And focus on the good things.
Yeah, that's incredible. It sounds like you have this like great mindset around like, in the face of this terrible situation, I'm here to make a difference and help out to the best of my ability with the training that I have. And now you're on the other side of things, making that training itself better, making better resources so that clinicians out there can use them to provide better care. And that magnitude of impact isn't just the patient in front of you, but generations of people who will use those resources to then provide better care. Thank you so much for being here today, Chris. This was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I hope I could help someone.
Thank you.